Hi everyone, I'm Molly Brown, a freelance creature and character designer, and today I'll be showing you how I go about editing and painting over my renders. I typically use Procreate or Photoshop, but today I'll be using Procreate. You can use basically any digital drawing media you have at your disposal. Raw renders will typically have small inaccuracies that you can pick out. For example, sometimes UV seams can be quite apparent. I can't really find a way to avoid these sorts of errors without using Substance Painter. You won't really encounter any seam problems in your poly paint since you painted directly onto your model and were able to flow the color between seams. However, in things such as specularity, they can make themselves known by there being a sudden difference in specularity in your sculpt. It'll look like a line crosses through the highlight, or there's an abrupt change in specular direction. In something like Substance Painter, you'd probably be able to apply specularity by painting it directly onto your sculpt. This will allow specularity to flow from seam to seam. However, in Maya, you're simply applying specularity to the entirety of your sculpt as one attribute, where your UVs are seen as different pieces to your sculpt. Therefore, each UV has its own set of specularity. This is the kind of thing that will result in directional differences. Each UV is treated as its own piece, therefore getting its own attribute and placement on a UV tile. This same sort of thing will happen with all the different attributes that you end up applying in Maya. Sometimes these errors can be avoided if you create your own maps in something like Procreate or Photoshop. However, these errors can be tweaked easily by just painting over them. Then by applying a little bit of noise to your strokes and marks, they'll mesh better to your render. Procreate strokes tend to come out really smooth, while 3D renders do typically have a bit of noise. The noise in renders can be quite apparent even if you let your render out to 100%. I make sure to always put my strokes or edits on a separate layer so when I apply noise, it doesn't apply even more noise to my raw render. That way, when I'm happy with how these edits look, I can merge my layers after I've added noise to specific ones. I usually always cover up imperfections and errors with the Spectra brush. The Spectra brush has a rougher texture and can sometimes look like noise in comparison to other brushes. It'll also give you a better idea of how your strokes might blend in comparison to your render. Though it might seem like a good idea, I don't typically recommend using the clone brush in Procreate, since because this is a 3D render, the surface differences are so subtle and minute that cloning one part onto another can look quite odd. In other words, you will notice there's a difference. I find it better to just paint over these imperfections, add some noise, maybe mess with the opacity, and then merge the layers down. Now that we've covered up these imperfections, in the next video, we'll continue tweaking our renders to continue getting the desired result.